Hello there, graduates of Empathize and Prototype.
That was quite ominous.
We're happy you're here. So Jeremy and I are really happy to be with you. And we are going to be running through some tools, as you might guess, very quickly and actively with you. I'm broadcasting from my home. Jeremy's in his home here in Shelter in Place in California. So wanted to start, we'll click through a few slides, but first, by virtue of introductions, you know us, we feel like we know you already, but I'll introduce my colleague, Jeremy Utley, graduate of UT, loves barbecue, beautiful family with 4 daughters, and always a pleasure to work with. And I've worked with him for 10 years, and we've done all kinds of interesting things. Hopefully you've had a chance to watch our past webinar on inspiration, and that's something new we'll be talking about in the course we're really excited about as another category to equip you. And with that, Jeremy, take it away.
So today what we want to do is we want to introduce you to a couple of updates to the tools that you learned in the Empathize and Prototype course, and also introduce you to a couple of tools to help you engage this kind of work virtually. So as Perry mentioned, we're both in our home offices. I'm in a nursery that's been reimagined as a home office. And what we want to do is we want to introduce a few tools. But just before we even get to the tools themselves, we thought it'd be worthwhile to frame what we're doing and why.
Yeah, we always like to start with the quote from our favorite 2-time Nobel Prize winner, Linus Pauling. And the premise is, with all of this work, is how to get to a lot of ideas at the core of innovating. And this research that we've come to love, that we want to bring you up to speed on, which is some research Bob Sutton did actually a while ago with a fellow Andy Hargadon, where they analyzed what it takes to get products or services into the market. And this is an image of the funnel. And it is first column is the number of ideas. The last column is the number of commercial successes. And what this shows you is basically this core premise. All of this is about generation and generating a lot of material. And the tools we'll go in today will cover that as well. 4,000 is the number of ideas. 226 is the number of things that must be prototyped. 12 things is the number of offers that are put in the market. And 2 to 3 are the number of commercial successes. So it just shows something we've talked about over and over in our courses, which always astounds me, is the amount of material you need to be willing to come up with and generate to get something innovative out into the world. We also, if you need some bedtime reading, we hear some people might have some trouble sleeping in the times of this virus crisis. I don't know, Jeremy, this could be a side business. Our academic writing will put you to sleep pretty quickly, but it's got some great material on what we just discussed about building this idea of a funnel. And at the core, everything we're doing with you today, and we're excited to share some new tools and techniques, particularly with empathy, but it's about building this funnel and this resilience to generate a lot of material.
Yeah, the PDF download comes with a free vial and dropper of hemp seed oil, so it's sure to put you into your slumber quickly. But in all seriousness, there is this, we think it's a really big idea to think in terms of input and practice and behavior, because creativity is, we would say, wrongly associated with or wrongly overly emphasized with output. And what we know, and what the creative practitioners with whom we collaborate know, is that creativity is actually a function of input. And so shifting one's definition from an output orientation to an input orientation is really important, and the input of imagination. And asking oneself, if I'm entering into a creative endeavor, or I'm hoping to generate a volume of material like Professor Claiborne just mentioned, if I want to generate that volume, what do I do to stimulate my imagination? What do I do to stimulate my thinking? And what the research is clear about is that imagination is triggered by unexpected inputs. It's actually when you come up against with something that you weren't expecting that your imagination gets triggered. You think of Johannes Kepler gazing into the night sky, right? And the conventional paradigm at that time is the sky is firmament. Literally, it is a substance. And what happens? And Kepler, with that paradigm, by the way, who founded the laws of planetary motion, how? He looked up at the firmament and saw a shooting star. And his question was, why isn't it breaking? Right? And it challenged his paradigm, and the unexpected input of seeing something move in what was believed to be fixed, he was able to start to imagine and wonder. And what we'd say, and the word that we like to use, is this word inspiration. When you think about a process of deliberately seeking unexpected input, we call that inspiration. It's something that artists do. It's something that creative professionals do, designers, musicians, etc. They're very diligent about inspiration. But we know that this word is a little bit of a double-edged sword, because for a lot of people, the word inspiration conjures images of cheesy posters hung in corporate hallways in the 1980s. And what we want to say is that's not what we mean by inspiration. What we mean by inspiration is a disciplined practice of seeking unexpected input. I had the privilege of teaching a class with a Grammy award-winning hip-hop artist last year, and he said something in our class which really struck with me. We were teaching students some tools for seeking inspiration, and I just said, Lecrae, do you have any comments on inspiration for the students? Because some of the students were saying, why are we talking about inspiration? And he said this: inspiration is a discipline. And to me, it's a really useful thing to think about. Do I have a practice for routinely seeking out fresh inspiration, routinely seeking out unexpected input? And that's actually what brings us to this design practice. What is design thinking? It is one of many ways, and we think it's a particularly compelling way, but it's a way to engage in a process or a practice of seeking inspiration. And what design thinking is really useful for is the fact that we become explicit or articulate about a couple of important responsibilities of the innovator. One responsibility is not just solving problems, but actually finding problems we're solving. And that's where the first part of the design thinking process comes in, is actually framing the right questions. And then, of course, the second responsibility of the innovator is answering those questions or solving those problems. You're very familiar, obviously, as graduates of the Empathize and Prototype course, with these various modes. What we want to do in this session is actually focus on this empathize portion of the design thinking process. And we want to share a couple of simple tools that we've been using as we're sheltering in place ourselves, and thought, wow, we bet folks who've been through the Empathize and Prototype course would appreciate these things. The goal is still to provoke fresh thinking in the innovator. And if you think about your job as an innovator as filling your funnel filled with ideas, you need routine practices to seek out unexpected inputs. And one of the very best ways to seek out unexpected inputs is talking to human beings who are impacted by your product or service.
Yeah, and we know you can't go to a hotel right now, right? The assignment is not valid. So let's show you some new ways to do that.
So what we're going to do is we're actually going to invite Robin, one of the members of the SCPD team. We're going to invite her onto the stage now, so to speak. And Perry is going to lead an interview with her live. And what we want to do is show you some simple tools that we've been using, digital tools and frameworks that will help us capture the rich, unexpected inputs that come from a user, that come from a customer, that might provoke us or stimulate our thinking and our imaginations in unexpected ways. So the challenge that we're going to undertake together in the next 40 minutes is humanizing the work from home experience. All of us are wrestling with what does it look like to work from home? And so we thought it'd be an interesting challenge. If as you recall, the first responsibility of the innovator is to find a problem worth solving, what's the problem here? And we all know that our natural bias is to think about solving our own problems, and we don't want to do that because that's not unexpected input. So instead, we're going to introduce a simple tool that we're going to use with Robin, which is called a journey map. Some of you may have seen it. It's a very simple tool. I don't think it was a part of the Empathize and Prototype course, but the basic idea is for any given experience, asking a user to simply chart their emotional progression through an experience or a time period is a useful way to begin to have a rich, empathetic conversation. I know what you're thinking right now. I don't have a piece of paper, and even if I did, I'm not with my customer. Jeremy, what do I do? I've got good news for you. I've got great news for you. We're going to introduce a couple of simple tools, but first, I'll have Perry kick off the conversation with Robin, and then what you're going to see is I'm actually going to show you a digital tool that we're using to real-time capture some of the rich and unexpected inputs that flow out of an empathetic conversation, even while it's being conducted virtually.
Yeah, and we're going to dive right in. I think it's more exciting that way, I think. And we'll, at the end, unpack what is the software, how are we working as a team, and show you sort of where all this leads. So with that, Robin, welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So Robin, thanks for doing this with us. No pressure that just pretend like there's not 100 people in the wings listening. Be yourself.
Okay.
I'm just going to ask you about working from home, okay? And what I'd like to do is begin with you recalling, maybe tell me about the particularly bad day, maybe the worst day you can imagine in recent memory. But if you have it in your head, I want to talk about the actual day with you. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So you have something that comes to mind as a particularly bad day or worst day in recent memory working from home?
Yes, I have it. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what I want you to do is going to be, it's just you and I having a conversation, but I'm trying to get a sense of your emotions from highs to lows as you go through. And I'll just sort of interject with a few questions here and there, and we'll hear about this day you had. Okay. So maybe tell me when it started and maybe where you were from, your highest high to your lowest low. Like, give me a sense of where you were.
So working from home and shelter in place, it's interesting because some days you get up and you're like, okay, this is just a normal day and I'm going to go about my day and it's going to be fine. And some days you get up and you don't want to do anything. At least I just feel apathetic about the whole thing. But that doesn't matter because when I open up my calendar, it's 7 hours of Zoom that day and you just have to do it.
Tell me about a particular day when you happen. Like, which day was this? Tell me about the day.
So a few weeks ago on a Tuesday. So I only have Monday under my belt. It's Tuesday, which means I get out of bed. And I did. And I shuffled into the kitchen and made some coffee, which helped. But I just had a big sense of apathy. I went through my meetings, my morning meetings. So let's say, I think I had 3 that day. Okay. I went through my 3 meetings. I got to lunchtime, and planning what you're going to eat for every meal takes a serious emotional toll on me. And I don't know who else feels like this, but on this day, especially when I was kind of already over everything, it just felt like the worst thing, which sounds, because I'm sitting here right now, I feel okay about my day and I feel good because we're here and this is fun and we're interacting. But on that day, when I was already feeling not great, deciding what I was going to eat for lunch just felt like it's too much. I just wanted to give up and say, why can't we just order something in, or why can't we do this? But, you go to the refrigerator and you put something together that you're going to eat. And then, you have 4 more hours of Zoom that, because it's a long day. So I have specific days during the week that are longer Zoom days than other, which means I was spending a lot of energy on the Zoom meetings. I was taking a lot of information in, but I wasn't actually getting anything done that I had to get done. I was just adding more to my list because that's usually what happens in a meeting.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So keep going. So as you go through those meetings, where do you end up on the emotional curve? So
I did the survival shuffle, which is something that my track coach used to talk about in high school, where you had to run how long and you just did the survival shuffle where I got through it. I took all the notes, I did all the things, but really all I was thinking about was getting outside. I am going to get through these meetings and then I am going to get outside, take a deep breath, walk around, work up a sweat. And that usually, and especially this day, that was really key for me.
And tell me about so continue on. Did you get outside?
I did. I went outside. I'm fortunate because I live really close to campus. So I hopped on my bike and rode to campus. And actually, what I did is I just stopped my bike as soon as I got to the Oval on Stanford campus. And I laid down and I listened to a podcast and I just let the sun shine on me. And it really was everything.
Wow. That's amazing. What an amazing day to hear about. So can I ask, I'm going to ask you a couple things that I've noticed and I want to follow up on.
Okay.
May I interject briefly?
Yeah.
Okay. So what you're seeing is and I'm going to share, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this slide over. What you're seeing now is basically the first part of an empathetic conversation where Perry was, because Robin isn't able to actually write on the journey map, Perry and I were using a journey map to real time capture what Robin was saying, or as best we could, using this simple application that we've been using called Mural. Anybody can use any application they want, but the point is we're quickly documenting the emotional trajectory and taking some notes of key phrases along the way. And now Perry's at a point where, if you look, and I'll share my screen again, but if you look at what we've got captured from the day, you can see we've actually got a pretty high amplitude experience here between the low point of I'm not getting anything done, I'm just adding more to my list, and the high point almost of laying down in the sun, listening to a podcast in the Oval. There's a pretty huge amplitude. And so what Perry's going to do now is he's going to begin to, as you already know, notice some things that have stood out to him, either key quotes or expressions or changes in direction. And then he's going to follow up on those things and he's going to ask for a little bit more information. And this is a very simple way to think about the flow that we're going through. So Perry, please continue.
Yeah, so Robin, thanks so much for this. So I'm going to dig into right in the middle of the day, or for my take in the middle of the day is just you had some amazing quotes about lunch. Okay.
Yeah.
And you said something in fact of deciding what to eat for lunch was just too much.
Yeah.
So tell me about that. It was clearly like things were kind of, in my sense, migrating, getting a little bit better, and then I could just see in your face it was a deflate, like you just, even here, weeks or two later, you felt just deflated.
Yes, I think that's because this decision needs to be made 2 to 3 times a day, right? Anyway, like any day, good day, bad day, that decision needs to be made breakfast, lunch, and dinner because we're all at home, right? There isn't, I'm going to grab this or I'm going to do this. And so on that day, when I was feeling taxed out by all other decisions, figuring out what to eat for lunch, even though it's such a small thing, sometimes it's just the thing that tips you over. And that day I was like, no, I can't, I don't want to. I did it. Of course I did it, right? What am I not going to eat? But it felt like a lot, which is silly to say, but also it did.
Yeah, and contrast that a little bit. You had a comment about your morning coffee. Like the morning coffee was kind of a little bit of a kicker for you, positive.
It is. My morning coffee is very sacred to me. I used to live in Italy, and I have brought good coffee habits back with me to the United States. We have a great Nespresso machine. I have my oat milk. I know what cup I'm going to have. There's not a lot of decision-making process with my coffee. I have it all settled in. I know exactly what I like, and it really, I just go and I do it. And it's also a ritual for me, whereas lunch isn't necessarily a ritual for me.
Awesome. Super interesting. So thanks. And then the other one I wanted to talk about was I'm going to take you to maybe a darker place even, but in the afternoon, you said, I'm not getting more done, but I'm adding more to my list.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
So that afternoon, Tuesdays are typically my busy day for meetings. And when you have meetings, yes, they're necessary because we are good in the team about having meetings that are necessary, but also it's not as if you're working on what you already know you need to do. It's reporting on or collaborating, which I do like collaborating, but also it's not working on the list you already have. It just might be adding some things to that list. Like, good things that need to be done, but also, it's not any quiet time to work and get some things done. And so I definitely survival shuffled through that day.
Okay.
I gotta know, Robert, when you say that phrase survival shuffle, tell us, what does it mean to survival shuffle? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What are you thinking? Tell us more.
For me, it means I accept where I am in my day and the energy that I have. And I don't spend any time giving myself a hard time about, well, you can get these 2 emails out between this meeting, or you can do this. I show up to the best of my ability for myself and my job and my team. But I also am not trying to crack the sound barrier on what's going on. I'm just doing my level best.
And is that just following up further? Is that a mode it sounds like a superhero mode. What do you do to, is it always a mode, or is it just sometimes triggered? Tell me, was that the same in the morning, in the afternoon, or was that in the afternoon you had an active thought about that? Yeah.
So in the morning, I do my better, more creative work in the morning. And so if I get to about 2 or 3 in the afternoon, it's not really my time to shine in meeting, like for creativity, something. So if I'm going to have a big meeting that needs me to really brainstorm, I can do it. It's just more challenging for me. So if I woke up that morning in shelter in place and was already feeling a little bit blah and a little bit depleted, then I know that by 2 p.m. that afternoon, which happened on this day, right, that I'm going to have to work harder to contribute to that creative conversation that's going on in the meeting. And so the survival shuffle is kind of letting everything else go that needs to be let go. And I don't need to expend more energy outside of, this is what is in front of me. This is what I need to be doing. I'm going to focus on that. And I'm not going to put more things on my plate.
Yep.
Robin, so this is amazing. I just have one last question. Can you tell us about another time you experienced the survival shuffle? What's another time you were aware of the fact you're doing it? And get as specific as possible, if you don't mind.
So outside of shelter in place or inside shelter in place?
Could be either. Could be outside or inside. Just another recent time where you felt like, I'm in the midst of survival shuffle again.
For me, it's typically tied with, if it's not like, I think shelter in place is a very obviously distinct and unique time, right, in our lives. Historically speaking, survival shuffle will show up for me if I didn't sleep well the night before, or I'm not getting enough sleep, or if I'm expending a lot of energy. So for example, when we run, last August, for example, this comes out top of mind because we were just talking about this yesterday. We run a pretty intense program on campus for 2 weeks in a row. So 10 business days, and we have 54 participants, for example. And that is a lot of bandwidth and energy. And so when you get up on that 8th day, right, you know what needs to be done because you've done it for the 7 previous days, but you're tired. I was bone tired, like bone. Like I would go home after work and there was no food, there was no anything, there was just shower and bed. That is survival shuffle. And that's okay. That's okay. But I also know when I need to take care of myself, and that means just go to bed. Just go to sleep.
Right. Okay, let's pause there because, Robin, first of all, we could talk about this for a much longer time, but let's pause there. We say thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Absolutely, Robin.
Thank you for having me.
And also,
thanks so much for having me.
I now have a new vocabulary in my lexicon, which I didn't have before. So I'm tremendously grateful.
Thank you.
Great. You're welcome. Bye, guys. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you. All right. So we just had this amazing conversation with Robin. And what I want to just showcase really quickly is if we zoom out, what we can see is the various kinds of aspects of the conversation. And you see, we put it here on our mural, but you can see the engaged part of the conversation is the actual graph that Perry drew while Robin was speaking. We noticed specific things. We're actually taking notes in the yellow and pink and green Post-its, mostly just for color variety, to be honest with you. No, I'm kidding. Red can be bad. Green can be things are getting better. And then when we follow up, we change Post-its just so that later on in the conversation, later on when we're reflecting on the conversation, we can remember kind of the sequence of events. And then importantly, we ended the conversation by asking about another time the user, in this case, Robin, felt the way that came out. We didn't know anything about the survival shuffle prior to this interaction. That's not a term Perry or I have ever used, but it became apparent in that conversation that that's an important part of the work from home experience for Robin, and an important part of our responsibility if we're considering how to humanize the work from home experience for Robin. That seems like something we want to understand more about. So that's the reason that we seek stories specifically about that at the end of the conversation. So Perry is going to kind of do some magic jujitsu behind the scenes in the mirror.
Like I'm doing stuff.
If you see his face, like a real consternation for a moment, it's because there's a lot. He's burning a lot of calories thinking over there.
Yes, I work a lot together.
I know. Yeah. I won't provide any captions underneath Perry's face as he's making his faces, but I could. Let's put it that way. So now
you can show your spreadsheet face, Jeremy's spreadsheet face. Let's do it.
It gets ugly. We'll do that in the Q&A, hopefully. So now we're back to this idea of problem finding. Remember, design thinking is an exceptional methodology for exposing ourselves to and connecting ourselves to unexpected input that is for the purpose of stimulating our imaginations, to fill that funnel, the exploration funnel. So I want to talk for a moment about defining the problem statement that we actually want to solve. And from your course that this is a point of focus. There's different points in the design process where we're flaring, and then there's other points where we're focusing. This define moment is a particularly important moment of focus. And in order to do that, we're going to do a couple of things. One is we're going to reframe the problem. The broad problem we were thinking about addressing is humanizing the work from home experience. Now we're going to reframe that and put that in language that's specific to Robin. And then the second thing, we'll probably do that in a bunch of different ways, and we'll try on a bunch of different ways. But the second thing we do is focus, meaning we choose. We choose one thing that we believe is worth working on. And the importance of reframing the problem is hard to overemphasize because your frame dictates a lot of what you see. And a lot of John Dewey, the famous American education reformer, once said, "A problem well put is half solved." And Abe Lincoln, I think he said, if I had call it 10 hours to cut down a tree, I'd spend 8 hours sharpening my axe, or something like that. But the point is, if you've got the right problem, you're a long way towards the solution already, which is why we care a lot about the frame. And it's at this point in the design thinking process that we leverage what's called abductive reasoning, or the process of inference, meaning we don't just take a statement at face value, but we seek to extrapolate some human meaning beyond the statement that might serve as an actionable learning that we could begin to ideate against. So this is different from a lot of organizations' definitions of insight because they often think about insight as the surprising data itself. We'd say that's not an insight. It may be useful information, it may be unexpected, that's fine. But the insight is actually the team's interpretation of that surprising information. And it's not a deductive process by which we say, if A, then B, and if B, then C, therefore, if A, then C, right? That's deduction. Inference is the process of wondering. Abductive reasoning is wondering. It's less certain, it's less sure, and for this reason, the image that we use to describe how inference feels is actually this, because we're making a leap. We're not certain that what we're saying is right, and we're almost playing the role of more of a psychotherapist. We're imagining possible interpretations of some things we heard for the express purpose of provoking our own thinking. Remember, ultimately, we're trying to fill a funnel, and it's not about getting it right. In fact, the vast majority of things in the funnel are wrong at this stage. There's vast majority are wrong at this stage. Vast majority are wrong at this stage. So it's not about getting the right thinking. It's about creating a volume of thinking it increases your likelihood of finding the very low probability outcome. And so we won't go into detail, but you remember the story of Doug Dietz, our dear friend from GE Healthcare. He came to one of the earliest programs that the D School offered. There he is in the picture. And as you remember, he designed MRI machines. And in his process of bringing design thinking back to his organization, he discovered that children in particular have a terrible experience with the scan experience. And he ended up designing a pretty amazing innovation, right, called the Adventure Series. And the Adventure Series transforms the exam experience, leveraging a very, very particular insight that Doug arrived at. What's interesting is Doug had to make that same Mario leap himself. If you think about this Mario leap of inference that we have to make in order to arrive at a truly transformative new product, it requires that we see something new. And what Doug saw, as you know, is that he saw that there was a sense in which a child who was going through a serious illness was missing something from their life. But importantly, it was his team's interpretation of that surprise that became the game-changing realization. The team interpreted their unexpected data points as what's really going on here is she feels like illness sucks all the adventure out of her life. And it was that reframe that enabled the team to get to a really breakthrough concept called the Adventure Series. So that Mario leap is what helps us think of new ideas that maybe we never would have thought of before. And the Mario leap is really important. In fact, it's so important that you know the user empathy map that we taught you in the Empathize and Prototype course? We no longer use that tool. Here's what we use instead.
What?
Yeah. Can you believe it? That's like codified. Yeah, exactly. You're getting the upgrade right now, so don't get upset. Don't be alarmed. Design thinking continues to evolve.
Everybody's like, stop, don't say that.
Yeah, exactly. Pull the plug. They're like, look at the But this is a simpler way to think about abductive reasoning and provoking yourself to interpretation. All you do is say, what surprised us? What might that mean? What surprised us? What might that mean? And in our experience, and as we watch innovators around the world trying to use that 2x2, what do users say, do, think, feel, it's unnecessarily cumbersome. Ultimately, your goal is to arrive at what we call a frame, or a point of view, as we called it in the course. But ultimately, your goal is to simply say who we met who inspired our thinking, what surprised us about them, what our team's interpretation of that is, and then based on that interpretation, the objective or aspiration or ambition, what do we think it would be game-changing to do? So we'll quickly show you in our mural, I think Perry will share his screen, and we'll quickly show you how we think about doing that just on our conversation that we just had with Robin. And we'll show you kind of real time how we work through it.
Awesome. Hold on one second. Let me get to the shared screen. There we go. So I'm going to take you in now. This is interesting. We've been trading off working on the mural, right? So this is this interesting app that you could do this many ways. I could have a cam looking at a piece of paper, but this was something we thought was interesting to share that we've used in a few classes. So as you look at my screen, I'm going to zoom out for a second, which always gives me a little bit of vertigo. Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay. But essentially, where we were is we did the journey map over here. So there's all the notes. And great interview with Robin, awesome note-taking. I was leading the interview. Jeremy jotted most of these notes. There's actual quotes. We see the arc of that interview. Well, I grabbed a couple things. I grabbed a few quotes from a morning coffee. I was struck by this thing about her morning coffee that she said that was a positive point. And then I got this interesting reference on the follow-up about Italy, which I thought was super interesting. That was part of what made that a positive experience in my reflection on the interview. And then the other thing we had to do, of course, the survival shuffle, because that's incredibly interesting, and we followed up on it.
When you get a phrase like that, you can't not reference it.
Yeah. I moved those over and said, okay, for me, these are the surprises I want to cover. So I I grabbed, literally these are quotes, I did this survival shuffle, and then I've got to get outside. Direct quote. The other two quotes I grouped together because I wanted for you all to make more sense of what made this so compelling to me is, in this morning of malaise, and I'm only a Tuesday and all this stuff, there was a bright point early on in the interview, which I saw a smile on her face during, which was, morning coffee made me feel better. I believe one of us followed up on that and said why, and there was a comment about remembering Italy. So I thought that was interesting. So Jeremy talked about this leaping to insights. It's a simple way to think about this is actively inferring. So I did this by myself. Traditionally, Jeremy and I, or if we were working with more people, would do this together to get more diverse perspectives into the inference.
Oh, Barry,
while you take the time
now, I'm working with you in the background.
Oh, yeah. So the morning coffee made me feel better, remembering Italy while making my cup of coffee. Those are the quotes. I said, perhaps this could mean what motivates those quotes, perhaps could be, for her, connecting a happy memory is a tactic to make it through challenging times. She never said that. She never said, oh, I call up Italy because it helps me, manage the morning. That was something that just came out. So I put that together and said, I wonder if that's actually something that's going on for Robin. The other thing I said could be another guess is, for her, a great memory can be called up to transform a task. So the other idea is maybe it's more active.Maybe she actually calls those things up when she needs them. That'd be another one. Then I'm jumping down a line to show you the next one. I was an inferring machine. While Jeremy was talking about inferring, I was doing it. So, but these are all guesses. I didn't go back to Robin and get her on the cell phone and say, is this what motivates you? Which you guys know from the course is not what you want to do if you're seeking insights. You're taking guesses at the motivation. So the other quote, I did the survival shuffle, and then I've got to go get outside. Struck both Jeremy and I, we both followed up on it. For Robin, she can access extra energy if she can see the end in sight. So that one, I really cued on this survival shuffle was definitely like reserve boost power. And in the other example she gave, it was day 8. And I wondered if there's something about seeing the end in sight that triggers that ability to use that superpower. And then I have a morning coffee ritual for Robin. A responsibility isn't a burden if it requires no thought. So Jeremy had another one right there. So what we want to do is, you guys worked on a points of view. We call them frames now as we teach. We think it's easier language. The main reason for that change is it's just an easier word we found to understand regardless of where you are in the world. Point of view tends to be a little bit more confusing when translated, but same idea. So it drops into a simple format. We met, describe the person. We're surprised to notice it's going to be a quote from up above we're going to pull down. We wonder if this means that's the leap of inference. We're going to put our inference there. That's our best guess. And then we're going to talk about, it would be game changing. What given those things, what would be interesting to do for Robin? So which one are we moving down, Jeremy?
Oh, I was playing through. If I pull these here,
there you go. Got it.
I was just playing through an example, basically.
Great. So it reads as a story, right? So it's story spine. We met Robin, a professional, zooming through long and similar days from home. We were surprised to notice, she said, I have a morning coffee ritual. We wonder if this means, for Robin, a responsibility isn't a burden if it requires no thought. Game-changing to automatize monotonous lunch responsibilities. Cool. So that's a frame of many that we could build. And you were with us before. We could grab, the next one, and we could move it down, and we could do a new point of view, putting it right next to it, right on top, and do an entire next point of view.
And what's fun is, and I'll show one extra slide here. So Barry, if you're going to stop sharing your screen for a moment, I'll show one slide. One thing that you can kind of do that's pretty cool, or maybe folks can see slide and the screen at the same time, I don't know. But one thing that's really useful is if you know what good is, or you know the definition of good, you're able to start to assess the various aspects of your frame and even compare them with one another. So here we've got a simple frame evaluation sheet where we say, okay, the first, table stakes is, does your frame focus on a specific first person and share relevant context? So Robin, yes, a specific person, a professional zooming through long and similar days at home, right? So I would say that's a pretty good focus. Sometimes we see frames start, we met bored millennials who are looking for purpose in their lives, right? And the thing that's hard is with design work, you can't design something for bored millennials. That's really hard, right? So the more specificity, the better. The next part of the assessment is, does your frame present a truly surprising observation or quote that provoked you to see a pain point, right? She said, I have a morning coffee ritual. Is that totally surprising? Maybe not in the abstract, but when she was talking about it's not painful, unlike lunch, coffee's not painful because it's a ritual, it's pretty surprising in that context, right? And then, does your frame offer an insight about the person that is emotional and flows logically? Wow, so we wondered if for Robin, a responsibility isn't a burden if it requires no extra thought. Oh, that's emotional. I'd say that's unexpected in some sense, right? You get the idea. We could go kind of quadrant by quadrant here and evaluate the four aspects of our frame. And then we could compare our evaluation of this frame versus another frame versus another. And even better, we could ask others to contribute. And what we'd say here is getting someone else's perspective is an invaluable insight at this point. Because if somebody who wasn't a part of this conversation and who wasn't a member of our team, if we read this to someone and they go, yeah, so what? We've probably failed, right? The point of framing up a human-centered challenge is that it's inspiring, that it transfers energy, that it provokes fresh thinking. And if on an honest examination, if someone else comes and says, I'm not moved by that at all, or wow, the second one is way more interesting to me than the first one, that's a gift. And we'd say it's something that you cannot do alone. It's actually a social skill. It benefits from a conversation from multiplicities of perspectives, and especially from perspectives beyond your team. And then lastly, assessment's really important because it helps you know what to do next. Do we need to refine some of our language about Robin? Do we need to move forward into brainstorming? Do we need to talk to a different kind of user and see whether we're confident that this is the right direction to take, right? Depending on the assessment we get from folks outside of our team, we're able to start to self-direct and navigate our efforts. So that's the real beauty of comparing multiple frames together, is you can quickly understand what you should do next.
All right. So
maybe just to zoom out. Yeah, maybe just to zoom out one level before we go to questions. Yeah. Remember, your job is not the creative output; it's filling the funnel of input. And thinking about that paradigm shift is very important. Your job as a leader, as an innovator, isn't the final thing; it's filling the funnel full. Recognize, second, that the funnel, the scale of the funnel to ultimately deliver commercial success is likely an order of magnitude larger than you thought it was. And then the last thing, being deliberate about seeking inspiration is a critical aspect of filling a funnel effectively and efficiently. And design thinking and interacting with end customers is one amazing way to gain inspiration, but it's not the only way. There's lots of other ways too. And just like the tools you learned in the Empathize and Prototype course teach you about gaining inspiration from customers, there's lots of other tools in our new course on innovation strategy, which is all about tools for gaining inspiration in other ways. So we hope that you will take the responsibility seriously to fill the funnel and take the practice seriously to be developing ways to seek inspiration. So with that, why don't we shift to questions?
Sure. So there's some we covered along the way. So I love all the questions. Please keep them coming as we talk. Our goal is to, again, equip you graduates with more inspiration around, of course, this this working in this medium that many of you are in right now, that you can't be face to face, and we found it super interesting and challenging to shift. As well as I love some of the questions about basic interview tactics, which are awesome. So maybe we'll dig into some of the stuff that's more about interview tactics first, and sort of by that mean how the interview actually worked, what we actually did. And then there's some really great sort of broader questions. So first one is, you had Robin describe her worst day. How do you choose the question to start the discussion? Would it be something similar? Describe your worst, best experience with X. Yeah, the answer is, one is we try them out. So we role play them on each other. So Jeremy and I will say, if we want to talk about best or worst experience, do we want to talk about a meeting? Do we want to talk about the day? And we'll sort of practice. I'll pretend I'm, interviewing Jeremy and say, well, let's try this prompt out. How does it work? Do we get the information we need? Are there interesting follow-ons? So you prototype it and try it. There is something about, if I had more time with Robin, I would like to juxtapose with the best as well. I might have asked her, and I had a journey map. If you saw on that thing, we built one maybe if we had time, but it's just, there's about, I think we were on with her for maybe between 10 and 15 minutes, which felt really fast. I would have loved to ask a few more follow-ups, but I would have, if I had another 10 minutes, I would have said, Robin, tell me about a spectacular day working from home. And I think that would have helped us unearth a whole different set of things in her life that are interesting to follow up on. So great question.
There's another question about body language and how do we observe body language. One of the things that we would say is, with two of us, while we're also monitoring a webinar chat and all that stuff, there's certainly bandwidth constraints, not only for our internet speeds and things like that, but just also for what we can attend to. We find that in a virtual environment, having a team of 3 or even 4 is really useful, because then different people can be responsible for different things. For example, one person can be totally devoted to being present and listening such that they're able to continue to drive the conversation forward. They're likely going to be unable to remember much of the conversation if they've been doing their job well. Another person can be observing the customer or the user's body language to start to see, when are they wincing, and specifically for cues that they want to follow up on later. When you said this, I noticed that you did this, right? So that's a person probably who would go into the second seat of interviewing. After the initial interview is over, that might be a great person because they've been observing and they can attend to more of those nonverbals. And then the third person is capturing everything, writing things down. And then maybe they actually have the ability, because they have more of a comprehensive view of the script or the transcript, so to speak, of asking deeper follow-up questions later. By that time, the person who had been on leading the conversation may have had an opportunity to catch their breath and order their thinking in a way that drives the conversation in a meaningful direction. But the point is, having some role clarity is really important, and having some collaborators is important. It's really difficult, even in person, to conduct interviews one-on-one. You might have noticed that whenever you went to the hotel, right? Trying to engage with a human being and take notes is really difficult. But if you've got a sidekick or a partner in crime, so to speak, all of a sudden they can free you to be present for the conversation and can document. When you're in a digital medium, we'd recommend 3 or 4 people. It's probably a good, safe practice so that you harvest as much of the qualitative information from the conversation as possible.
Yeah, I've got a great question. Well, they're all great. First of all, thank you. The questions are amazing, and it's actually really fun to be in this because you've all have experience. So the questions are terrific about sort of digging into the tactics. This one I think is a great one, an important one to cover relative to Journey Map, and not something we mentioned. So thank you, whoever submitted this. Did you determine when to start or end the Journey Map? I noticed her coffee experience was beyond the scope, but valuable, and we're able to jump back. So the idea of this scope of, if I had said, the Journey Map must start, what's your first minute of work, Robin? Great, 9 a.m. Let's start from there, because we're only designing working from home, right? What's interesting, and this happened, is that the scope of the coffee I would say that's her private time, yet it to me was super interesting to design from and use. So it's out of the scope of what we wanted to talk about, yet incredibly valuable. Fully agree. We did a thing recently with an airline a while ago and they wanted to do they were a project for a class. I think the scoping of the project was something like, we really want to deal with the curb of the airport to getting on the plane experience. Okay, so interesting. So that's the way it was scoped. And I think the journey map, when we were using a journey map, was literally like, tell us about your journey from the curb to, and we tested it out. And, the folks we talked to at the airport, I mean, for when you guys can remember traveling, when do you start thinking about your trip? Well, people started saying, last trip I took was Thanksgiving. So I started talking to my family, I don't know, maybe 6 months before and doing research on tickets and checking out websites. And all of a sudden we're just like, whoa, the journey map. I remember we were taping another line and a piece of paper in front of getting to the airport because there was so much of the experience that was so rich that was before it. So the answer to that question is, if I had been more careful, actually, I might have started the line of almost midway, because so many times, I can't tell you, a user will say, well, but actually, my experience of my day at work, for example, started the night before when I got an email from my boss. It's like, oh, I gotta have the journey map start where they start. So the answer is that line does not need to start from 9 to 5 and you're bound. So I'm glad you asked this. I think I drew it in such a way it may have felt that way. But it's follow the user, and wherever they want to start that journey, go with them there. So a lot of times it does start long before the thing you're designing in. So that's really a great question, and a great way to use the journey map is think of it as an infinite line. Wherever they want to start and wherever they want to end, when you ask them about whatever the experience is you want to talk about, that's what you should cover.
There are a couple of pretty simple questions we can cover quickly as well. One is, there's talk about big data. How do you integrate this kind of rich but anecdotal information with big data? One thing that we'd say is, very simply, qualitative insights are a great way to learn how to interrogate big data. Big data is largely inaccessible until you have a line of inquiry. And these kinds of rich, qualitative, even anecdotal interactions can equip you with some really great questions to ask of your big data. The other one I wanted to mention briefly, it says, could you explain more why you didn't use the user empathy map anymore? Very simply, it's unnecessarily convoluted. It requires more processing on that tool than is needed. So at that time, when we were using that tool, we would say explicitly, you only can see what someone says and do. What they think and feel, you're already inferring a little bit, right? That's inferred. So we're already making one step of inference. Then we're saying, now, what are the insights? Infer beyond your inference. And you go, there's a very tenuous, it's like on the branch of a tree. It's like, I'm pretty far out here. It's starting to get wobbly, right? And it's because we're inferring on top of inference on top of inference. We just said, really, whether they say it, a lot of times people say and do things that aren't relevant. And we find teams spending an inordinate amount of time filling these buckets because there seems to be some use to filling the bucket. And that's just not true. Ultimately, the question is, what surprised you? What was unexpected? That's really useful. The stuff that surprised you that you didn't know, right? Because it's about provoking your imagination. Great, it surprised you. What do you make of that? Effectively, that's what designers are doing. And when we're teaching design thinking, we're trying to simply convey the tools that designers use to approach creative problem solving. And really, they're looking to be surprised, and then they're interpreting those surprises in interesting and unexpected ways in order to provoke their thinking. And a lot of it is implicit, a lot of it is automatic, but basically it's, what's the surprise? What is my interpretation of that? What are the implications? If I can try that on in 5 seconds and I can do 100 of those iterations, great. What you may, as the end customer or as the person who reads the New York Times article, you probably only ever hear about the one chain that actually worked. But the reality is there's 100 or 1,000 of those chains that they tried on and didn't make sense. And for us, simplifying the tool to, it's a couple surprises and a handful of interpretations, free people up to do more of the work that we want them to be doing, rather than giving the busy work of just filling this huge canvas full of Post-its when very few of them have any bearing on the opportunity at hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a bunch of questions. Thanks, Jeremy. I think there's a bunch, and the answer is it's an evolution, I would say. It's an evolution of the tool. The principle behind all of that is still the same about inferring. A bunch of questions about inspiration. Jeremy talked a bit about that at the beginning. I checked into the Pax on our team who does all the tech and keeps all of this running and makes us look great. To put out, there's a link to the webinar we did, in this time 2 weeks ago, I think, on inspiration and a couple different topics. And I think that'd be a great place to start. Many of you are saying, tell me more about that. There's some, I think we go through a whole bunch of different techniques and tools to seek inspiration. There was a great response to it. So many people reaching out through LinkedIn and asking more questions and finding the tools valuable regardless of what you're doing in your personal life, your work life, what have you. So that would be a place I would look for those. And then at the At Home Guide, there was also one I love, which is just the basic interview question is, Robin seemed a bit like an open book. How do you work with customers that are not giving much information? Are there other leading questions we would use? So I think a lot of times, one thing I would say, some people are a bit more open, some people are hard to get through. And we did a class recently with, I think we had 60 students, Jeremy and I, and we did this interview with this elderly gentleman. And it was about healthcare for older folks. And it was just, he was no hard feelings. He was really had a tough time hearing. And we wanted to move really quickly. We were in front of this class, and he had a tough time understanding, why am I talking to you? But there's all these, it just was really, really confusing, and then very, very hard to get more than one-word answers out of him. And to me, it was a terrific moment where we suddenly realized, wow, this is a great thing to teach, which is sometimes interviews are hard. Sometimes people don't want to open up. They don't want, you can go open-ended question, and Robin was ready to share. She wanted to talk about her day, and she wanted to share, and it was such a gift. And that's awesome. And sometimes interviews take a lot more effort and pushing with questions and being patient and asking why. And sometimes some interviews might yield a lot of information and some not as much. And I think that's okay. And if we were to be working on this as a project and we wanted to demonstrate really good design to you, we would actually say, let's interview 3, 4, 5 people before we start going into define. We did this to show you this tool and this technique of working at a distance. But the other thing is we would have interviewed more people. We would want some different kinds of people. And some of those interviews might have been hard. People might not want to share as much. We might have gotten to tough topics. And I think as far as how far you can go in an interview, to me, as far as the user wants to let you into their life, we don't want to, sometimes I'm more careful not to put sort of, incredibly personal information into those quotes or notes so that it never goes anywhere. But at the same time, if it's emotional to them, I sort of respect that and say, that's really awesome. They're sharing this. It's gonna make the project amazing, and we'll be able to do better design the more emotion they're willing to share. So it's really a question of working and being patient and realizing some interviews are going to be amazing, and it's just going to be easy for somebody to open up, and you're going to have trouble almost taking notes fast enough, which Jeremy and behind the scenes were typing away, taking so many notes. And sometimes it's, wow, I almost didn't need a notebook. They're one-word answers, and it's really, really hard to crack anything open.
And just being honest about that is, that the interview Perry mentioned is actually one of my favorite interviews that I remember because it was so honest. It was so, at one point, it is now. We're in front of like 80 people. It's happening live. And at one point he looked at the woman who was kind of helping him and taking care of him. He said, "Are these people joking right now?" I mean, it was so the absolute, most undesirable outcome. And yet it was great. And we were able to learn a lot, and we were able to have humility about it and have a sense of humor about it. And it's part of the process. Not everybody you talk to is going to be an open book. I would say one thing just to compliment what Perry said, is there's an element of trust building. You can't just, it's not like, hey, how are you? Tell me about your worst day at work, right? We know Robin. We have a good relationship with her, right? And so when you're interacting with folks who are strangers, maybe you don't know as well, or you're building a relationship with, it's worth investing time in trust building. And there are a bunch of different ways to do that. It's kind of beyond the scope of this webinar, but it's certainly important to build trust, to build a sense of care, reciprocity, et cetera, before you dive in. And sometimes that takes time. So anyway, we're at time today. I think hopefully we'll share a link to the other webinar. So if you're curious about the inspiration topic, you can learn a lot more there. And we're eager to connect with you all. And of course, there's also the new inspiration course in SINE as well. So if you really want to dive into that topic, it's I would say an exceptional hands-on immersion into the topic. So we'd love to get your feedback there and to see the cool stuff you come up with as a part of that class too.
Thanks, and the link has been shared with you. Thanks, Pax, for doing that. All right, so we'll see you guys on the internets.